Hey, that's not so great. The Raptors, their second loss in a row, now 1-2 on the season. They lose to the Miami Heat. You are, of course, listening to the Raptors Reaction Podcast. I am, of course, Samson Folk. And so the Raptors, they lose another game. A lot of warts showed up in this one. As far as what they succeeded at, we found out a lot of the regular stuff along the way. Precious Achiuwa found his form, played a massive role in this game, had an absurd plus minus, I believe, plus 16. Nobody else on the roster except for Fred and OG were even a positive, and they weren't in the double digits or anything like that. I guess Malachi was a plus one as well. But, plus minus isn't everything. But Precious was awesome tonight. He found his groove again. We had a Scotty Barnes injury. We had Christian Koloko ejected from the game, which I didn't agree with. And so everybody cares a lot about Scotty. So if you're listening to this and you didn't really catch the game, he's injured. We don't know the severity of the sprained ankle, but he sprained his ankle, and I believe his right ankle. And yeah, he wasn't able to come back into the game. He did this after Tyler Hero came in late trying to take a charge, got under him. The broadcast never actually showed what happened to his foot just because of the camera angles, and it was so close to the baseline camera guy. So I'm not sure if it was because he landed wrong or Tyler fell on it while falling backwards, but Scotty finished the bucket, had an and one, and this was Scotty, probably I would say his best game of the season so far. He had 11 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, but he was absolutely essential to attacking the Heat on the inside because the Heat were playing a lot of the time pack line defense against Pascal. If the shooters aren't going, then Pascal has to hit, a really healthy diet of mid-range jumpers to try and beat this defense. But if a guy like Scotty doesn't have the same attention and can beat his guys one-on-one, Gabe Vincent, Kyle Lowry, kind of stick him under the rim, finish over top, that's a huge deal. He was doing that in this game, and the defense, well, nobody's defense was that good off the start, but Barnes continues to not be the worst defender on the floor, which he was for a lot of the early part of last year. So very encouraging stuff from him. It sucks that he got injured. It really does suck. And then the Christian Koloko stuff. So Koloko got tied up with, I believe, Caleb Martin. And yes, Caleb Martin is the same guy who took Scotty out from behind last year while Scotty was going up for that dunk. Scotty didn't get injured on that play, but there was a lot of danger to it. And yeah, so Caleb Martin got into a bit of a tussle with Koloko. He wrapped him up, foul called him. Koloko swung his arm back. Don't swing your arm back, I guess I would say, but that's as far as the people who are committing acts that deserve blame. I would say swinging your arm back isn't that bad. And he caught Martin on the shoulder. Koloko falls to the ground. Martin kind of charges up to him, starts flexing over top, starts talking trash. Koloko gets up, and so from the angle behind Martin, it looks like Koloko wraps Martin. But from the angle beside them, you can see Martin wraps Koloko first, like a tackle, and tackled him out of bounds into a chair, into the stands. And so we saw, like a bit of a tussle breakout. Koloko, to his credit, the camera was trained in that bird's eye view. He did not escalate any further. He wrapped up with Caleb Martin, and they both went down, and he didn't even try and like swing or do anything afterwards. If I was in that position, I wonder if I might have done something like that, honestly. But yeah, so they both got ejected. I don't agree with that whatsoever. I don't think Koloko should have been ejected. I don't even think he should have had a tech, dude. Koloko didn't do anything. He swung his arm back. But we all watch, Marcus Smart. Kyle Lowry was in this game. Kyle Lowry swings wildly at times. Guys do that all the time. Guys don't always do what Caleb Martin did. And so, yeah, they both got kicked out. But 112 to 109, the Raptors lost this game. They nearly made it back, and largely on a couple things. Precious Achiuwa coming into the game, not only finding his defensive form, which really, really did affect not only how the Heat operated in a lot of their base actions, but when the Raptors got beat, man, Precious being back at the rim helped with a lot of that stuff and kind of moving them off to second side. And when we talk about Precious, and I was talking about how much attention Pascal was getting, what kind of defense the Heat were playing on him. When Pascal lets that ball go, and in the first half or in the second and third quarters, we're looking at shooters kind of pump and put the ball down, and they're trying to relocate to another guy who maybe he'll shoot it, but he's not going to get to the rim. Even OG in this game, right? He's not going to get to the rim off his own dribble. He's mostly canning threes tonight. he had 13 points, and 9 of them came from threes. So Precious is the guy. Yeah, he hit some threes to kick everything off in this game. He went 2 for 5. Those were his first 2 makes. But everything else is a guy getting to the free throw line, a guy who's getting to the rim on the fast break. He got Tyler Hero. We'll talk about their kind of dynamic, I guess, in the back half of the podcast. But when he had Kyle Lowry isolated on him, we're looking at a guy, Kyle Lowry. He thinks he's got the juice. He can defend the big. Precious takes him to the rim. Precious is too coordinated, too strong, too good a handle at that size. He keeps the ball outside himself and just allows his body to work downhill. And that was a massive part of this, was that the Heat kept extending their shell out, and that really pressured the Raptors shooters, and they could catch up if they were kind of in that mid-range area. And they were able to collapse on Pascal. But if you have a guy like Precious, if you know, he's just gonna punch the defense, get to the rim. If you listen to this podcast, you've heard me talk about this a lot, but not even punching gaps for Precious, but just being able to kind of grind downhill against his defender and get to his spot. A lot of really great shot making in this game. He went 6 of 7 from the line too. It's a really, really big deal that happened. But for the most part, the bad stuff in this game, Barnes got injured. Koloko getting bounced probably was actually helpful because Precious is a significantly better player than Koloko. And I don't know what's going on with Nurse and Precious, but Nurse didn't seem like and Koloko, relative to expectations, was fine against Brooklyn, but he wasn't a game changer, and probably for most of these minutes early on in his career is going to err on the side of a negative. And we see Nurse not really giving Precious run when Precious can have a game like this. And obviously, and the thing is, Precious didn't get this run until Koloko was out of the game. So, yeah, I'd like to see Precious get more run. I think he deserves a little bit more leeway than this, especially with the bench being as limited as it was. Thad got 10 minutes. He was like a minus 15 in them. Banton, he hit a 3, good for him, but also a guy who those limitations I talked about in the preseason that he was beating in the preseason, he had his counters. We're looking at a guy in the regular season who's just not able to, he can't get downhill, and he's not able to threaten the defense in any meaningful way. And they play off of him, they sink, they go under, and it just allows them to tighten up driving lanes. And it really does affect Pascal, for example. And Gary Trent Jr. is another big dynamic of this game, is that he was very, very poor decision making early on in this game. And what helped change this and help the Raptors kind of get their offense back on track, yes, Precious Achiuwa getting that 18 points. But in addition to that, Gary Trent Jr. giving up or taking 23 points, right? Taking 18 shots, 5 of 12 from 3. Really, really big deal. That's what I wanted to see, because in the early part, like we had this play, a couple plays actually, where the Raptors are trying to get that mismatch because they know Pascal, and everybody watching, pay attention that Pascal rarely ever makes the wrong decision. This is a guy who he makes fantastic reads to the laydowns, to the cutters, to the shooters, whatever it is. He is a passer. He's rarely ever turning the ball over. And he draws so much attention that he doesn't have to be dangerous with his passes or his reads. Teams just have to overload on him. Gary stopped trying to force the issue and decided, okay, the ball goes back into Pascal's hands. I will form up if my guy comes off of me. If he wants to rotate over for the double, I'll be available. I'll make the shot. That was such a huge deal. He later on in the game, he had like a little pin down. He came, wide pin, and he came off of it. And Precious was open on the roll, and he pulled up for a little jumper and missed it. But offensive process went from very bad to very good for Gary. And so, a very strong Gary game as far as I'm concerned. Barnes, I talked about him. I thought he was great. Fred, mostly just kind of a ball mover in this game. Whether it's Gabe Vincent or Kyle or Jimmy, anybody, Bam especially too. Like if he's getting that, Caleb Martin, if he's getting that switch, he's not dusting a dude, not in this game. And he was a guy 100% that the Heat, when that ball comes out of Pascal's hands, they double. They're looking at Fred as that's number one. Recover to Fred, force it out of his hands. And, there were quite a few hockey assists from Fred too. Well, hockey assists from Pascal, actual assists for Fred. He finished with 10. So the ball kind of squeaks out to Fred. The Heat are in scramble mode. It goes out to a shooter, OG, Gary, whoever, right? And so that's what Fred was doing. And I understand that's affected by the type of defense that the Heat are playing. And so he made a lot of good decisions in that regard. But Pascal didn't have the ball every time. He didn't break it down every time. Sometimes Pascal is a bystander on these offensive possessions. Sometimes he's off the floor. And Fred not having any juice as far as like creation, going 2 for 9 in this game, 1 of 6 from three. A little bit tough because you want him to carry when that kind of stuff isn't going on. But again, 3 steals. So he now has 11 steals on the season, I think. Kind of absurd. So as far as you can tell, the things that I'm saying are good came in the good runs for the Raptors, and the things that I said were bad came in the bad runs for the Raptors. Similar to that Brooklyn game last night, there were droughts offensively that the Raptors they couldn't manufacture their way out of. When they started playing better offensively, it was correlated with that defense. They're getting stops. They're not taking the ball out of their own basket, having to inbound it. They're pushing the ball up the floor, and not only does that create like that pitch play to the right wing from Pascal to Fred that everybody loves, or Pascal to drive it right down the middle, everybody to collapse, and a quick shootout to the corner, right? All that kind of stuff. But on top of that, it also means that Miami doesn't get to pick and choose who everybody picks up down the court to best be in the position to pre-switch against all of this kind of stuff. Like if they're bringing Fred up the court to set a screen, maybe they can send Jimmy up the court to guard Fred for this action instead of like Gabe Vincent or something like that because they're expecting a switch. So they do something like that in the half court when they're ready. But when it's in transition, you can get the ball low, you can do that hit ahead, or you can push it to a point where the defense doesn't get to pick and choose that kind of stuff. You just get to take it at their players. And they do. They play quite a few guys who are way too small for Pascal. Basically, like, let's look at this team. It's Deadman is not too small for Pascal, of course, but he's affecting at the rim in help. And Pascal would obviously dust him. Bam is a good defender for Pascal for what it's worth, especially with help and especially as a helper. Bam is a really great defender. We all know this, of course. But but he didn't get to, Pascal didn't get to ISO. Pascal didn't he's not so lucky that he gets room to do that kind of stuff. He's gonna be I suspect one of the 3 or 4 most doubled players in the NBA this year. Sometimes he gets tripled. And so there's that cross matching stuff in transition is really, really important for the Raptors to kind of work in early offense and for Pascal to start picking dudes apart. And Pascal at the end of this game, 23 points, 8 rebounds, 9 assists, 8 of 19 from the floor. This is a game where, he's a superstar. I think we know this much. He's sleepwalking to 23 points, 8 rebounds, 9 assists, 1 turnover. But the thing in this game is that pull-up jump shot, it will come and go to some degree if it's beyond like 16 feet. If it's that, 4 to 14 foot area, Pascal he'll shake and move, he'll pivot, he'll find his space, he'll hit a lot of shots in there. But I think he shot 36% on the deeper mid range last year, which is similar to a guy like Luka Doncic, just to be fair. But that's a if the Heat are able to maintain the shell of their defense, a tight shell, and the Raptors shooters can't cut against it, and maybe the offense is out of rhythm and all that kind of stuff, then that means that Pascal, the ball's going to be in his hand, extended away from the rim quite far, and he's either going to be pushing into a lot of contests in the paint, help side contests, and trying to finish high off the glass, or bankers and all this kind of stuff with a lot of attention on him, or he's going to have to try and shoot over the top of it. So he didn't have the jump shot to fuel them today, which would have simplified a lot of stuff, but he did keep working his use of escape dribbles to re-engage defenders after, shooing away the double, changing the line of sight for help defenders and stuff like that. So he can pick out shooters. He may very well, this far in the season, be the best player in the league as far as initiating in the middle of the floor. I don't think that's much of an exaggeration, if any at all. I don't see a lot of players tasked with what Pascal is tasked with. Like, hey, get the ball here, initiate, get to this spot, draw the double, draw the triple, make the read. The ball comes back to you at the end of the possession. Maybe you have to make the shot now. If they don't come, or if the doubling is working and they're getting the ball to your hands, work harder to shoot the double away, re-engage your guy quick, beat him off the dribble. Now the help side defense is spaced out to the outside of the paint. Maybe you can get there. It's just a lot of work. And I think right now he's the best in the NBA at doing that. He's unbelievable. And yeah, OG in this game, 5 for 14. The three-point shooting is nice. The defense, the late double, I really hated. I'm not sure if I wasn't watching the sideline at this point. When I rewatch the game, I'll kind of take a look at this. But that late double where Kyle Lowry was able to cut behind and Jimmy had OG ISO'd for I think like 7 or 8 seconds. They're on the right baseline, and the play had developed to that point. It's an empty side. It's just those two guys over there, and Precious kind of hovers over for that late double, and the Raptors are down at this point, and I really, really hate that. I understand maybe from the point of view, I don't agree with this point of view, but I understand that maybe you would want to force a turnover or something like that. But in an empty side, and Kyle Lowry's the guy, he timed that cut perfectly. It's just, and he finished at the rim. It's I don't know if Nick Nurse was yelling from the sideline. I don't know if that's a freestyle from Precious. I don't know if they're saying this or if they were in a huddle and they say, hey, if they run this, if it ends up like this in a possession, this is what we're doing. But whatever it was, I didn't like that. And on the next possession, OG played straight up defense. They did not send the help on Butler, and Butler tried to get into his bag and ended up traveling. That's what I expect to see. In the scheme where the Raptors love to overhelp and they love to do all this kind of stuff, I think for the first however much of the game, that makes sense totally because you have this, whirling dervish, helter skelter stuff going on. You have to commit to that totally. But when the game slows down like that and Jimmy sees that double coming so clearly, it's so patently clear. I don't like that at all, especially, yeah. And they've been doing this for quite some time. OG is one of the best defenders in the NBA, especially when it comes to being a guy who stops stars. We saw him stick Trae Young last year. Trae Young is much more explosive on ball than Jimmy Butler is. Trae Young is one of the most incredible offensive engines of the past like 10 years. So if OG can handle that, especially since OG is not at a strength deficit to Jimmy Butler, you have to let him try and do that on his own. Yeah, we talked about everybody. Malachi Flynn deserves a lot of love, I think. He's competitive at the point of attack defensively. He moves well above the break. The rotations and stuff like that, I'm not really sure about. We haven't seen it in a while from him, but hit 2 catch and shoot threes, ended up taking 4. He had 3 fouls really early. The Heat were like, "Hey, we want to see if we can get this guy in trouble, maybe get to the free throw line." That was part of it, but coming off the bench and hitting a couple threes in this game particularly, really, really great. I was a big fan of it, but Precious is the lone bright spot from the bench. The bench continues to be very, very troublesome. Tell me if this sounds like January, February of last year. OG plays 38, Pascal plays 40, Gary plays 38, basically 39 from Gary, and Fred plays 39, basically. It's just, that's a lot of minutes. And the Raptors, they were supposed to have shored up the bench coming into this season. And Boucher, it was supposed to be, he and Precious far and away the best bench players. That was supposed to be true, of course. And Otto Porter Jr. was supposed to be able to come in and kind of punch up at that because he's great. And neither of those guys are in the lineup. So it looked like the Raptors might be, not necessarily a deep team, but a team with some depth. They currently have none, and that is a really tough pill to swallow. Nobody likes that, least of all me. Potpourri, what else was interesting in this game? The Precious Achiuwa and Tyler Hero stuff. Tyler Hero made a contested layup. He cut down the middle. Precious was the low man. It wasn't a particularly bombastic contest or anything like that. Precious didn't get up for it. He went straight up, and Hero made the finish. They call a foul, and so Hero, he did the too small motion. Hand hovering above the ground. You're too small. We've seen a lot of guys do that, and Precious got him back. He was pushing the ball in transition. Hero tried to kind of step in, got bounced because Precious, pound for pound, is one of the most, intimidating and strong athletes in the NBA. He's really, really tough to stop when he's going downhill. And he got the end one, and he got Hero back, which was pretty fun. Aside from the bad vibes of the Scotty stuff, because that does suck. I really, really hate that, especially since Scotty was playing so well, and you just want a guy to be healthy. He's finding his groove. I was pretty happy with Scotty's performance against Brooklyn as well. He really had a tremendous second half against the Cavs. You're looking at a young guy who's, destined for stardom. You don't want it to be like in fits and starts. You just want a guy to go and play some games. We've dealt with that with OG, right? Is OG having such bad luck in getting poked in the eye, appendicitis, all this kind of stuff, a broken finger that he played with for like 2 months. All this kind of stuff is it's so detrimental to development. So we just have to hope that Scotty isn't out for too long in this one, because he's so important to what the Raptors do, especially against a team like this. He would have changed a lot of the schematics of how the Heat decided to play as this game went on. He would have just ate them alive, and Pascal would have had a much easier job in this one too. So the top quick reaction comment is from LD. Quote, loved our competitive fire tonight. Hope Scotty doesn't miss too much time. End quote. Me too, man. I really, really hope he doesn't. That basically hits the nail on the head as far as what I was talking about at the end. The Reggie Evans Award, I guess, would of course go to Precious Achiuwa. Awesome in this game. I'm very excited if this means that, you know, he gets to is a guy, I wrote my big feature before the season about this guy for a reason. I'm very big on Precious. Everybody who listens to this podcast, reads my work, knows that I am, and I'm excited for him to find, a good run of form. Yeah, and the Mitchell Robinson Award, which if you're not familiar, because I rarely ever give it out, the first reaction podcast I ever did, it was after William Liu went on to Yahoo Sports and he started doing the podcast there, and now he hosts, the most popular basketball show in Canada. Good for Will, of course. But I tell you this much, the first reaction podcast I did, which was pretty bad, Mitchell Robinson injured Kyle Lowry, and on like somewhat of a dirty play. And so anytime that happens, the Mitchell Robinson Award is just that. And Caleb Martin, I would give the Mitchell Robinson Award, not that he injured anybody, but just that is particularly villainous the way he was behaving against Christian Coloco. And for what it's worth, I've talked about this already, but I loved Christian Coloco's medal in that situation. So everybody who's listening, make sure to subscribe over at raptorsrepublic.com. It's extremely important. And I'll get on my soapbox just a little bit, but the work I do here, while it is free, my written work is the only paid stuff. The pay subsidizes this work being free, so that helps a lot. We're betting that Raptors Republic is important enough, the work is good enough, and I think my work is good enough to be deserving of pay. And I'll get off the soapbox, but if you have the means, subscribe over at raptorsrepublic.com. That's the one that costs money. As far as the YouTube, yeah, just subscribe here. That one's free. And if you're listening on the podcast, just keep doing your thing. Thanks for kicking it with me. The Raptors losing a game, 1-2. I'll be back here after Monday's game, and you'll be hearing me after that. I'm going to try and get Nikias Duncan to do the post-game pod with me on that one. This is kind of embarrassing if we don't do it, but I think we'll be able to do it, and we'll talk Raptors and Heat, the 2-game series that they're playing out here. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for Louis Satzman's Gamer on this one. I have no idea what he's going to write about, but as always, it's going to be fantastic. Thanks for tuning in with me, whether you got into this in the morning or at night. Have a blessed day, and goodbye.